So the next thing I'd like to talk about with theming is template files. These are great. The most the most common use for template files that I have is using the page or creating a page front.tpl file. This allows you to create a custom front page for your site, and basically the second Drupal sees this file in your theme directory, it says, okay, so this is what I'm going to use for the front page every time the front page is loaded. And to go off what I mentioned earlier, I'll use this in conjunction with creating regions in my theme, regions in my info file. So most of the time, front page is a very unique thing on a site. And as far as design goes, and it will oftentimes have a completely different structure than the rest of the site, or a slightly different structure even. But it's still useful to have this pagefront TPL file so that you can create your own regions or styles specific to the front page and give it a unique look and feel compared to the rest of the site. The next item I'd like to talk about is using preprocessed functions when possible instead of using TPL files. So this has to do with overriding functionality and an output of your theme or themes that you're using in Drupal. There are two ways to do that. As you can see, one is preprocessed functions. Actually, there's three. One is preprocessed functions, one is using TPL files, and the third is to actually create a module. The two that we're going to go over is preprocessed functions and TPL files. Basically, using preprocessed functions, you would use a preprocessed function in your theme's template file. Um, and what you would do is you'd hook into theming functions or preprocessed functions so that you can alter the output of what Drupal is rendering on the screen. Um, and by doing this, you're just basically hooking right into the function as it's being called, as opposed to when you're using a TPL file, which is the other way to do it, where you're actually physically changing the output of what's being put on the screen by altering the TPL file that's being rendered through. And the reason that you want to use preprocessed functions over TPL files is that generally they're about 5 times faster on load. Um, Also, with TPL files, you have to be careful, and even with preprocessed functions, if you're altering something that's being rendered on the page quite a few times, like links, the links variable, for example, it's going to if you aren't careful in how you decide that you want to hook into this piece of functionality, it could alter your page load times, significantly if the page is large enough and it's being hit often enough and you're not specific enough with how you want to change the output and hook into or filter through this piece of functionality. So if you do choose to go the route of creating a TPL file, you want to override it in the least static way possible. And what that means is when you create a TPL file similar to page front, there's a specific naming convention that you use that Drupal looks at and uses to know whether or not or know when it should be calling this file. So, for example, page front, when you hit the front page, Drupal knows I'm going to use this TPL file um, to render my output. If or that's another excellent naming convention to use with your TPL files because that's something that's probably not going to change in your site with future updates. So if you had a news content type, you node or was it node content type news. You would just follow that naming convention and change the TPL file to reflect that content type, or change the TPL file name to reflect that content type, and it will happen on whenever a uh, news content type item is being called on your site. And then further, if you have only specific pages that you want to use this news content type with, then you can in your content type or in your TPL file you can do conditional statements and things like that to filter through and just use the TPL file on specific pages. Another decent approach to using TPL files for specific pages using naming conventions If you have a if you have a specific page that you want to use a TPL file for in Drupal, um, your one of your first notions would be to use the naming convention that goes node ID. So node 725.tpl, and that probably isn't the best approach because further down the line, if your site has to be redone or goes through significant changes, or even if the page just gets deleted and has to be recreated again, it's going to have a completely different node ID. And you can go back and you can change the name of the TPL file, sure, but some cases you might forget to do that, or it could, if you forgot that you used that naming convention, then you could be troubleshooting something that's very simple for longer than you need to. So instead of doing that, a great option is to and we don't have the snippet available, but if you were to Google or look up on Drupal.org, uh, Node TPL naming convention using URLs, there's a great code snippet that you can use and put in your template file that will allow you to use a URL naming convention. And so in the future, if you have a slash signup page and it's always going to be, you know, oursite.com/signup, you can just name the TPL file node dash sign dash up.tpl, and in the future, if that sign up page gets deleted, as long as you use the same URL, it's still going to render that template file. Um, Another helpful template piece of information is creating helper classes for the body tag. So section name, whatever the section of the site you're in, if it's the news section or the um, employee directory section, or if it's the node type, it's helpful to have those variables being called in your body tag as classes so that you can further theme and style your site. Um, and the last thing that I'd like to talk about concerning template files that really isn't just a template file item, it's more of an overall Drupal piece, Drupal trick, is to clear your cache whenever you can. If you make a significant change in the template file, or you create a module, or you hook into a theme using preprocessed functions, and you're almost 100% positive that your code is correct and you follow the tutorial 100% and it's just not working for you, try clearing your cache, because that's probably what it is. So that's you know something I wish someone told me when I first started working with Drupal, because it's a really valuable piece of information. So the next item on the list is JavaScript. So when writing JavaScript for Drupal, it's best to use Drupal behaviors instead of document ready. And um, people who are familiar with both of these might ask why. They both, on the surface, the same um, have the same use. They're there to initialize code on page load, but Drupal behaviors takes it one step further and does something that document ready does not. Um, when you leave code initialization just in the hands of document ready, it will not refresh, or it will not initialize unless the DOM is completely refreshed. So that's where Drupal behaviors has the upper hand, because on AJAX calls and when items are added to the page, Drupal behaviors just knows it will initialize the code for you. So you know it really saves you a lot of time with having to try to find a way to refresh the DOM, or upgrading your site to a version of jQuery that supports the live function and things like that. So Drupal.behaviors is a pretty great tool. Another great Drupal and JavaScript related tip is using Drupal add JS to add variables to the page that you want to access via JavaScript. So if you're writing a script and you want to have a conditional in that script that looks at node ID, you would do Drupal add JS and then node ID variable right in there, and it'll be available for you to use on in your JavaScript files. Uh, and the last thing I'd like to mention are modules, helpful modules that we use at OHO that we really appreciate. Block theme, block class is a good one. It allows you to add specific classes to your blocks via the block interface. So if you have a block that you want to just have its own unique styles, just go ahead and load up block class and put in unique style class on the block page, and it will do that for you. Menu block, menu editor, and menu attributes, all very useful modules. And probably the one on this list that I like the most, that I use the most often, is the devel module or the developer module. And as you can see, DPM is your friend, and this is what I use often, is the DPM function, which allows you to look at any variable or array of variables in Drupal that are being called on the page that you're loading and see all the information that's associated with them. So if you're using a view, for example, and you are loading or a whole bunch of fields from a specific content type, and you are creating a very, very structure specific view page that where you want to print out those variables in a specific order and specific places on the page, you would use the DPM function to look at those variables and see what their proper names are and where they're being called, and then uh, use that information to hook into that and just print it out the way you'd like.